At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law leaned close and whispered, "Good thing now the house is ours." Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Thank you very much, and God will bless you if you comment Amen on this video. Now, let's return to the main character of this story, me. The hymn had just ended when I heard those words. The church was filled with the scent of lilies, and soft beams of colored light filtered through stained glass windows. Everyone's heads were bowed in prayer. My heart was already heavy with grief, but her whisper made it sink deeper than I thought possible. I did not answer her. I simply held on to the corsage pinned to my black jacket, pressing it closer to my chest as if it could keep me from falling apart. To anyone watching, I looked calm. To me, it felt like thunder had cracked right inside my ear. I walked forward, my steps steady. People may have thought I was leaning on strength from God. The truth was, I was leaning on silence. Silence has always been my shield. After the service, we walked to the fellowship hall for the reception. The tables were covered in white cloths, with small vases of carnations. Relatives gathered in clusters, some crying, some exchanging polite words. I kept my head high, moving from group to group, thanking people for their condolences, but my ears caught fragments. My daughter-in-law, standing in the corner with her brother, said, "We should schedule the photos this week. Fast escrow. Mom won't fight in probate." No. My hands tightened around the paper cup of coffee. Not a drop spilled, but my stomach turned. This was not grief speaking. This was calculation. While I had just laid my son to rest, they were already carving up his life, as if he had been nothing more than an address on a deed. I thought back to the years I had given. I co-signed for their first vehicle when the bank refused them. I helped with a semester of graduate school tuition when loans ran out. I watched their children nearly every weekend so they could have time together. I never asked for repayment. I thought family did not keep score. But now, standing in that reception hall, it felt like every gift had been written down on some invisible balance sheet, and she had decided it was all hers now. Each thank you I had once cherished echoed in my ears like hollow coins. Later, as I was leaving, my late husband's old friend Martin caught up with me. He had been our family attorney for decades. His hair was thinner now, and his glasses kept slipping down his nose, but his handshake was as steady as ever. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said quietly. His eyes softened with sympathy, but then they grew sharper. "Tell me, did you ever record the transfer on death deed your son insisted on last year?" The words struck me like a match in the dark. I remembered that day at my kitchen table. My son had slid papers toward me and said, "Mom, I want you secure, no matter what happens." In my grief, I had forgotten. But Martin's question made the memory rush back. Maybe my son had left me more than sorrow. Maybe he had left me protection. That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The porch light cast a small pool of yellow across the front steps. But inside, shadows stretched long across the walls. I sat at the kitchen table, the funeral program folded in front of me. I traced my son's name on the cover, whispering, "I won't let them erase me." Every corner of that house carried his touch, the porch he helped me paint last spring, the shelves he built in the garage, the laughter that still seemed to echo in the hallway. My daughter-in-law thought she could claim it with a single whisper, but she underestimated the strength of a mother who had already lost everything once. I looked at the picture on the mantel. My son's smile stared back at me, kind and proud. I moved the frame slightly closer to the center, as if to remind myself whose memory this house truly held. Tomorrow, I would call Martin. Tomorrow, I would find those papers. I switched off the lamp, letting the room slip into darkness. Outside, crickets sang their nightly song. Inside me, though, something new stirred a small, steady fire. This was not over. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The house was still, and the silence felt heavy, almost like it was pressing on my chest. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the folded funeral program again. My son's name printed in bold black letters reminded me of everything I had lost. But grief could not be the only thing that defined me. I remembered Martin's words. "Did you ever record the transfer on death deed your son insisted on?" That question had lodged itself in my mind like a nail. I called his office as soon as the clock struck 9. His secretary recognized my voice instantly and told me to come in that same afternoon. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed how the building looked almost unchanged from decades ago. The same brick facade, the same narrow glass doors. Martin greeted me in the lobby. He looked tired, but his eyes were alert. We sat in his office, surrounded by shelves of law books, their spines worn and faded. He poured me a glass of water and let me sit quietly until I was ready to speak. "Martin," I began. "My daughter-in-law thinks the house belongs to her now." She whispered it at the funeral. His eyebrows knit together, but he didn't seem surprised. "I suspected there might be conflict," he said softly. "That's why your son insisted on updating everything last year." He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a copy of the deed. "Your son placed the house under a transfer on death arrangement. That means when he passed, the property bypassed probate. It came directly to you." My breath caught. "So, the house is mine?" He nodded firmly. "Yes, legally, it belongs to you, and no one can contest that without severe penalties. Your son wanted to make sure you were safe, especially if there were disagreements." Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with sorrow. My son had thought ahead, protecting me from battles he feared might come. He knew his wife's hunger for control better than I realized. "Martin," I whispered. "He must have known she would try." Martin leaned back in his chair. "He loved you. He wanted you secure. That's why he updated the will, too. There's a clause about behavior. If any heir tries to intimidate you or cause harm during the grieving period, their share can be reduced or even eliminated." I closed my eyes. The whisper at the funeral echoed in my ears again. She hadn't just been unkind, she had set herself up to lose everything. When I left the office, the sky was overcast, heavy with gray clouds. I drove home slowly, gripping the steering wheel, as if the truth in Martin's words might slip away. But when I parked in my driveway and saw the porch light still shining from the night before, I felt steady again. The house stood tall, its windows reflecting the muted daylight. This was my home, my sanctuary, and now I knew it was mine by law as well as by love. That evening, my daughter-in-law came by. She didn't knock politely. She opened the door with her key, stepping inside as though she already owned the place. She set her purse on the counter and said, "I've been talking with a realtor. We can get this house listed within 2 weeks." I stayed seated at the table, my hands folded. "This house isn't being listed," I said calmly. Her head snapped toward me. "What do you mean? You can't live here alone. It's too much space. It makes sense for me and the kids to move in. You can find a small apartment." I took a breath, steady and slow. "Your husband, my son, made sure this house passed directly to me. It is legally mine. I will not be moving out." Her mouth opened, but no words came out at first. Then her face tightened. "That can't be true." "Martin has the documents," I replied. "He showed me everything. Your husband wanted me protected. He was clear about that." She glared at me, her lips pressed thin. For a moment, she looked like she might shout, but then she grabbed her purse and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the frames on the wall rattled. I sat in the quiet again. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt strong. She thought I would crumble under grief. She thought I would be too weak to stand. But I wasn't standing alone. My son had already laid the foundation for me to resist. The next day, I started taking small steps. I changed the locks on the doors. I canceled the joint credit card that had been tied to the property. I forwarded the mail to make sure nothing slipped into the wrong hands. Each action was quiet, almost invisible, but together they built a wall of protection around me. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and flowers, their voices soft with sympathy. I thanked them all, but inside I was building something stronger than grief. I was building resolve. A week later, Martin invited me back for the reading of the will. I sat in his office again, the same shelves of books behind him. My daughter-in-law arrived with her brother, both of them looking smug. as though this was the day they would finally claim what they thought was theirs. Martin read each line carefully. He explained that personal items in the house were mine. The house itself had already passed directly to me. The retirement accounts had been updated too, listing me as the beneficiary. Then he reached the clause my son had added. Any heir who disrespects or intimidates the widow during her time of mourning will have their share reduced to a minimum distribution. Evidence may include verbal statements, written messages, or behavior witnessed by others. Martin paused and looked up. There have already been multiple witnesses to inappropriate behavior at the funeral. That qualifies. My daughter-in-law's face went pale. She tried to speak, but Martin lifted a small recorder. Several people heard your words. They were reported, and they've been documented. I also have a recording from a guest's phone. The room was silent except for the sound of her sharp breath. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I simply sat there, holding the edge of my chair, letting the truth speak for itself. My son had protected me. His love had built a shield that not even her greed could pierce. When I walked out of that office, the air felt lighter. The clouds had cleared, and the sun shone across the parking lot. I lifted my face to the light, whispering, "Thank you, son." I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was the keeper of his memory, the guardian of his promise, and the rightful owner of the house he made sure I would keep. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe again. After the will was read, life didn't suddenly become easy. The papers might have been signed, the law might have been clear, but bitterness doesn't fade when truth is revealed. My daughter-in-law stopped visiting for a while. Weeks passed without a word from her. The silence should have been peaceful, but instead, it carried a weight of its own. I knew her absence wasn't surrender. It was planning. One afternoon, I went to check the mailbox. A notice from the utility company caught my eye. It said the account had been closed at my address. I hadn't done it. She had tried to switch everything into her name, hoping to force me into confusion. I called the company immediately, explained the situation, and faxed them the deed papers Martin had given me. The representative apologized and restored my account, but it left me with a lesson. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. She thought paperwork was her weapon. She forgot that I had patience and proof. At night, when the house was quiet, I found myself walking the hallways. I touched the banister my son had polished, the frame of the door he had replaced last summer, the porch steps we painted together. Each corner reminded me of him. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was the last piece of him I had left. And no matter how many tricks she tried, I would not let her strip that away. About a month later, she showed up unannounced. Her car pulled into the driveway, loud and quick. She marched up the porch steps, her heels clicking against the wood. "I want to talk," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She crossed her arms, her chin raised. "You've made things very difficult. You know the children should be raised in this house. You're just being selfish." Her words struck deep, but I held my voice steady. "This house was secured for me by your husband, my son. He wanted me safe. That was his wish, not mine alone. You may not agree, but it doesn't change the truth." Her face twisted. She muttered something under her breath and stormed back to her car. Gravel scattered as she pulled away. I stood on the porch, letting the cool evening air settle around me. The crickets chirped, and for a moment, I felt stronger than the anger she had tried to throw at me. Martin called a few days later. "She's been making inquiries," he told me, "asking about loopholes. But every attempt she makes is backfiring. The deed is airtight. The clause in the will is clear. The more she pushes, the more she risks losing." I thanked him and hung up. It was comforting to know I wasn't standing alone, but I also knew I couldn't let bitterness consume me. So I poured my energy into small things. I planted fresh flowers in the garden, the kind my son used to admire yellow marigolds and deep red roses. I repainted the porch swing, brushing on layer after layer until the wood looked almost new again. Neighbors would wave as they passed, some stopping to say, "The house looks beautiful." I would smile, though my heart still ached. Grief is strange. It doesn't leave all at once. It lingers like a shadow, but working with my hands gave me something steady. something that reminded me life could still grow in the cracks of loss. One Sunday, after church, a neighbor leaned close and whispered, "Your daughter-in-law has been saying things around town, that you stole the house, that you tricked her." The words stung, but I only nodded. People will believe what they want. I had the truth, and I had my son's love written in ink on those documents. That was enough for me. That night, I lit a candle in the kitchen and sat with a cup of tea. I thought about everything my son had left me, not just the house, not just the papers, but the strength to endure. My daughter-in-law wanted me erased, but each day that I woke up in that home, I was living proof that she couldn't succeed. Life didn't return to the way it was. It never could. But slowly, I began to find peace in the routine. Morning walks, evening prayers, dinners cooked in the same kitchen where my son once sat telling stories. Sometimes I still heard her whisper in my ear, "Good thing now the house is ours." But now, when the memory came, I answered in my heart, "Number, it was never yours to take. It was always meant to stay with me." Weeks passed after her last outburst, but the quiet never fooled me. I knew she was still moving pieces in the background, hoping I would stumble. One afternoon, I received a letter. The envelope was thick, the kind that carries legal threats. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a notice from a lawyer representing her. She was challenging my right to stay in the house, claiming I was unfit to maintain it. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the papers. My son's picture was on the mantel. His smile seemed to remind me, "Stay steady, Mom. Don't let them shake you." So, the next morning, I drove back to Martin's office. He took one look at the envelope and sighed. "She doesn't have a case," he said, flipping through the pages. "This is intimidation, nothing more. The law is on your side. She's wasting her money." I nodded, though my chest still felt heavy. "She won't stop." Martin leaned forward. "Then let her fight shadows. You stay rooted in the truth. That's how your son planned it." Back at home, I followed his advice. I didn't respond with anger. Instead, I kept living. I painted the fence white again, even though the boards were crooked. I baked bread for the church fundraiser. I tended the garden, trimming roses carefully. Every time I knelt in the dirt, I thought of my son, how he once teased me for talking to the flowers. "They listen, Mom," he used to say with a grin. "That's why they grow so well." The flowers bloomed brighter that season, maybe because I needed them to. But she didn't stop. She spread more rumors in town. She told people I had forged papers, that I had manipulated her late husband. A neighbor repeated her words to me at the grocery store. I only smiled politely and said, "The truth has its own voice." Then I pushed my cart down the aisle, choosing apples as calmly as if the world weren't buzzing with lies. Inside, though, it hurt. Lies always do. But I had learned not to chase every whisper. One Saturday, I found her car parked at the end of my driveway. She was sitting inside, talking on her phone. She didn't come to the door. She just watched the house. I stood on the porch, arms folded, and let her see me. After a moment, she started the engine and drove away. It struck me then she wanted me to feel hunted, but instead, I felt something else. Pity. For all her plotting, she was only proving my son right. He had known her greed would reveal itself. That was why he left safeguards for me. A few weeks later, Martin called again. "She's burning through her inheritance with legal fees," he said. "At this rate, there won't be much left for her. The court has already warned her about frivolous filings." I listened quietly. "She'll blame me," I said. "She can blame whoever she wants," he replied. "But the truth stands." I started writing letters to my grandchildren. They were too young to understand the tension, but I wanted them to have my words someday. I told them about their father, about how he laughed when he fixed the lawnmower, about how he always brought me coffee just the way I liked it. I wrote about the garden, about family dinners, about faith. Not once did I mention the fights over the house. Some truths belong to adults, but love belongs to children. The seasons shifted. Summer light grew shorter, evenings cooler. I sat on the porch many nights, listening to the cicadas. She came less often now. Perhaps because the town had stopped listening. Perhaps because even she was running out of steam. But I knew she hadn't let go completely. One evening, Martin dropped by. He brought a folder. Inside were copies of every filing, every ruling, every paper that confirmed my security. "Keep this somewhere safe," he told me. "This is your shield. If she tries again, you won't even need to speak. The papers will speak for you." I placed the folder in a drawer, beneath the tablecloths. It wasn't just paper. It was proof of my son's love. That night, I lit a single candle. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I thought about everything that had happened, the whispers at the funeral, the threats, the rumors, and I thought about the strength it had taken just to stay silent, to let truth stand taller than anger. I whispered toward the empty room, "You chose me well, son. You gave me armor I didn't even know I would need." The battle wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was made of steady steps, calm words, patient silence. And in the end, that's what left me standing while she stumbled. Winter came, and with it, the kind of cold that settles into the bones. The house creaked when the wind pushed against it, but the walls stood firm, just as I did. I thought perhaps the storm with my daughter-in-law had finally passed, but one morning I opened the mailbox and found another letter. This time, it wasn't from a lawyer. It was from her. The handwriting was hurried, almost angry. Inside, she wrote that she deserved the house, that her children deserved it, that I was being selfish and cruel. She said she would never forgive me for keeping it. I sat at the table with the letter in my hands. For a moment, my heart ached. I wished things had been different, that grief could have bound us together instead of tearing us apart. But then I looked around my kitchen, the curtains my son had hung, the chair he had repaired when its leg broke. And I knew, this house wasn't about greed. It was about memory. It was about love. A week later, she showed up at the door again. No lawyer this time, no documents, just her. Her eyes were tired, her voice sharp. "You're really going to live here alone until you die?" she asked. I stood steady. "Yes, because this is my home. Your husband, my son, wanted it that way." She shook her head, muttered something I couldn't catch, and left. Her footsteps faded down the porch steps, and the car engine roared away. That was the last time she tried to take the house. Life moved forward. I started attending church potlucks again. Neighbors came by more often. Not with pity anymore, but with friendship. I even hosted a small dinner. Just 4 close friends around the table, laughter mixing with the smell of baked chicken and warm bread. For the first time in months, the house felt alive again. Not heavy with grief, not threatened by whispers, but full of simple joy. The real victory wasn't in winning legal battles. It was in reclaiming peace. It was in walking through my own front door without fear. It was in hearing the creak of the hallway floorboards and knowing those sounds belonged to me, and always would. Sometimes I still think about her words at the funeral. "Good thing now the house is ours." But now, when the memory comes, I don't feel broken. I feel stronger. Because she was wrong. The house was never hers. It was mine not because of a piece of paper, but because of a promise. A promise my son left me. One born of love, not greed. One quiet evening, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped low. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I kept it, son. Just like you wanted. I kept it." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, it felt like he was there, steady, protective, proud. The fight had ended, not with shouting or grand gestures, but with something quieter, something deeper. Strength in silence, faith in the truth, and in the end, that was more powerful than all her schemes combined. Spring returned, soft and gentle, washing away the harshness of winter. The flowers in my garden began to bloom again, the same marigolds and roses I had planted months before. Their colors seemed brighter this time, almost as if they carried a message. Life moves forward. I walked the yard in the mornings, coffee in hand, the dew still clinging to the grass. Each step reminded me that I had survived storms I once thought would break me. The whispers at the funeral, the threats, the letters, all of it had passed like heavy clouds. And now, the sun had found its way back into my days. Inside the house, I began sorting through boxes. My son had left behind so many little things, photographs, books, shirts folded neatly in drawers. At first, Touching those things made me cry. But as weeks turned into months, I realized they weren't just reminders of loss. They were treasures of love. I framed his favorite picture, one of him standing on the porch steps, laughing, holding a paintbrush. It hangs now in the living room. When I pass by, I smile, because that's how I want to remember him, not the illness, not the final days, but the joy he carried even in small tasks. As for my daughter-in-law, she stopped coming around. The phone grew silent. The mailbox held no more threats. Perhaps she finally realized the battle was unwinnable, or perhaps she simply grew tired. Either way, her absence became its own kind of peace. I chose not to dwell on bitterness. Carrying anger would have weighed me down more than her words ever could. Instead, I prayed for her, not because she deserved it, but because I needed it. Prayer was the only way to keep my own heart from turning cold. The grandchildren visited sometimes. They ran through the hallways, their laughter filling the spaces that had once felt too empty. I baked cookies with them in the same kitchen where I once sat with their father. When they asked about him, I told them stories how he loved music, how he fixed bikes for neighborhood kids, how he always made time to sit on the porch and talk. I never spoke of the battles over the house. They didn't need to know that part. What mattered was that they knew their father's heart. That was the legacy worth passing down. One evening, as I rocked gently on the porch swing, I thought about everything that had happened. I realized the true inheritance wasn't the house at all. It was the lesson my son left me. To stand firm, to trust the truth, and to live with grace even when others tried to strip it away. The house was just the vessel. The real gift was resilience. Neighbors often told me, "You're strong." I used to shake my head, unsure. But now I understand. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, steady and quiet, in the way you choose to keep going, even when others want you to fall. I had been called weak in my grief. But grief didn't destroy me, it revealed me. Seasons will keep changing. One day, this house will belong to someone else. But until then, it is mine to guard, mine to fill with love, mine to honor. Not because of a signature on paper, but because of the promise my son left me when he said, "Mom, I'll make sure you're safe." That promise carried me through every whisper, every threat, every cold night when I thought I couldn't go on, and it will carry me still. Tonight, as I close the curtains and lock the doors, I whisper once more, "I kept it, son. I kept your promise, and I kept myself too." The house settles around me, quiet but alive, its walls holding not just my grief but also my strength. And I know this is more than survival. This is victory. As the days stretched into summer, I found myself falling into a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons in the garden, evenings with a book or a phone call from a friend. Life wasn't perfect, but it was steady, and that steadiness was a blessing. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a sanctuary again. Every creak of the floorboards, every whistle of wind through the window frames, it all belonged to me, part of the life I had chosen to keep. Sometimes, I thought about how close I had come to losing that peace. Not because the law was weak, but because grief makes the heart fragile. She had counted on that fragility, believing I would give in, let go, or crumble under the weight of her words. But instead, the opposite happened. I grew stronger. One Sunday afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table writing in my journal. I wrote about the garden, the neighbors, the grandchildren. And then I wrote something that surprised even me. I am not afraid anymore. The truth of it struck me. For months, fear had been my companion, fear of losing the house, fear of being left alone, fear of being erased. But now, I felt none of it. I closed the journal and smiled. That smile came from a place deeper than relief. It came from survival. A week later, I attended a community potluck at the church. Folding tables stretched across the fellowship hall, covered with dishes, macaroni salad, fried chicken, green beans, and peach cobbler. People gathered, sharing laughter and stories. For the first time in a long while, I felt fully present, not weighed down by whispers, not haunted by court papers, just their part of life again. A neighbor sat beside me and said softly, "You've been through so much, but you carry yourself with grace." I thanked her, and in that moment, I realized something. The true victory wasn't just keeping the house, it was keeping my dignity. Of course, memories of my daughter-in-law still surfaced. I would see a car that looked like hers on the road, or I'd hear someone mention her name in passing. But instead of bitterness, I felt distance. She no longer had the power to disturb my peace. One evening, I even prayed for her again. Not long, not with many words. Just a simple prayer that her heart might one day soften. Not for me, but for her children. Because they deserved a mother free of bitterness. The grandchildren came to visit more often as the weather warmed. We baked cookies, we planted seeds in little pots, we watched fireflies dance in the yard at dusk. Their laughter echoed through the hallways, and each sound felt like a blessing. I knew then that the house was fulfilling its true purpose not as a prize to fight over, but as a place of love, learning, and memory. My son would have wanted that. He had always wanted laughter to live here. One quiet night, I sat on the porch swing, looking at the stars. The air was warm, cicadas humming in the distance. I thought of my son, as I often did, but this time, the memory wasn't sharp with pain. It was soft, like a gentle light. I whispered into the night, "I'm all right now. I've kept your promise, but I've also kept myself, and I will keep going." The wind brushed against my face, and in that moment, I felt peace, true, lasting peace. I know more seasons will pass. One day, the garden will need replanting. The fence will need mending again. And someday, I too will leave this world behind. But I no longer fear those truths. Because what I've learned is this. Strength isn't about holding on to a house. It's about holding on to yourself. It's about honoring the love that built the walls, the hands that painted them, the laughter that once filled them. That's what endures, even when everything else fades. So now, when people ask me how I survived it all, I simply smile and say, with patience, with faith, and with the promise of a son who wanted his mother safe. And that answer, I believe, is more powerful than any courtroom, any rumor, any threat. As summer deepened, the days stretched long and golden. The garden flourished with color roses climbing the trellis, marigolds lining the walkway, tomatoes ripening under the sun. I often found myself standing among the flowers, hands resting on my hips, just breathing in the scent of life. It struck me then. After so much turmoil, after months of whispers, threats, and shadows, peace had finally rooted itself here again. Not forced, not fragile, real peace. The kind that settles into the soul when you've walked through the storm and come out whole. One morning, I woke early, sunlight streaming across the floorboards. I fixed myself a simple breakfast oatmeal with honey, a slice of toast, and sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the tick of the clock on the wall. I looked around at the room, at the little details my son had left behind, the paint he had chosen for the cabinets, the hook he installed by the back door for my apron. His touch was everywhere, and instead of sorrow, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I had stood firm, that I had not let his memory be swallowed by greed. This was not just a house. It was his gift, his promise, and I had honored it. Neighbors still came by from time to time. Some brought pies, some just sat with me on the porch to talk about nothing in particular. Their kindness reminded me that community is a lifeline. When my world had felt like it was collapsing, those small gestures, an apple pie, a listening ear were threads that stitched me back together. I thought about how often we underestimate the power of simple kindness. We think grand gestures are what matter most. But sometimes it's just the steady presence of someone who says, "You're not alone." The grandchildren continued to visit on weekends. Their little hands tugged at mine, pulling me into games of hide and seek around the yard. We baked cookies, we painted rocks, we planted seeds. Their laughter filled the rooms, echoing down hallways that had once felt hollow. In their laughter, I heard healing. In their eyes, I saw the future my son had hoped for. And in my heart, I knew I was doing what he wanted. Not just surviving, but living. One evening, as I sat on the porch swing, a thought came to me. This chapter of my life had been about more than just keeping a house. It had been about learning who I was when tested. I had been called weak, selfish, even cruel. But through every trial, I discovered a deeper truth. Strength is not about loud victories, It is about quiet endurance. It is about choosing dignity when others choose deceit. It is about holding faith when others give in to bitterness. And that truth became my anchor. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not fighting back harder. I always shake my head, because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, strength whispers. It waits. It outlasts. And in the end, it shines brighter than any scheme or lie. That is what I held on to. That is what carried me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I whispered to myself, "I've kept it all, son. The house, the garden, the stories. But most of all, I've kept your love alive." The wind rustled through the trees, and in that moment, I felt him near not in grief, but in peace. I know that one day, time will carry me away too. The house will pass to other hands. The garden will be tended by someone else. But that doesn't frighten me anymore, because legacy is not made of wood or brick. Legacy is made of love, of resilience, of faith passed from one heart to another. And that legacy is safe. So as I sit here tonight, the porch light glowing softly, the air warm and still, I feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the battles I endured, for the peace I claimed, for the promise I kept. This house may stand as my shelter, but my true home is in the lessons I've carried and the love that will never fade. The seasons turned again, as they always do. Summer's long golden days gave way to crisp autumn mornings, when the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and the trees painted the horizon with reds and golds. I found myself sitting on the porch more often, wrapped in a shawl, watching the leaves drift to the ground. Each falling leaf reminded me that nothing in this life is permanent. People change, relationships shift, time moves on whether we are ready or not. But within that truth, I had found something solid: my own endurance. I began writing more often in my journal, not just about daily events, but about the lessons life had carved into me. I wrote about grief and how it reshaped a person. I wrote about betrayal and how it cuts deeper when it comes from those closest to us. But most importantly, I wrote about resilience, the quiet, steady kind that allows you to stand tall even when everything around you feels uncertain. Sometimes I thought, maybe one day, my grandchildren will read these pages. Maybe they'll understand the struggles their grandmother faced, not to burden them, but to show them that strength runs in their bloodline. One Sunday at church, the pastor preached about forgiveness. His words stirred something in me. Forgiveness, he said, was not about excusing what someone had done. It was about freeing your own heart from the chains of anger. I thought of my daughter-in-law, the sting of her whisper at the funeral, the battles over the house, the letters, the accusations. It all came back in a rush. For so long, I had carried those moments like stones in my chest. But sitting there in the pew, I realized I didn't need to carry them anymore. They were hers, not mine. So I bowed my head and whispered a prayer. Lord, I let it go. I forgive her, not because she deserves it, but because I deserve peace. And in that moment, a weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying seemed to lift. After the service, a neighbor squeezed my hand and said, "You seem lighter these days." I smiled. Maybe I am. That simple exchange felt like a turning point. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was healing. Back at home, I prepared a simple dinner: chicken, green beans, cornbread fresh from the oven. I set the table for myself, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt blessed. Each bite tasted not just of food, but of gratitude. Gratitude for the house that still sheltered me, for the memories that still lived here, and for the peace that now filled these walls. As I washed the dishes afterward, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in a long time, I saw not just an aging woman marked by loss, but a survivor marked by grace. The grandchildren visited that weekend. We raked leaves into big piles and jumped into them, laughing until our cheeks were pink from the chill. I watched them play and thought, this is the true inheritance I will leave them: not money, not property, but love, laughter, and lessons in resilience. Later that night, after the children had gone home, I sat alone in the quiet house. I lit a single candle and opened my journal again. This time, I didn't write about grief or betrayal. I wrote about hope. I wrote, "The storms did not destroy me. They revealed me. I am stronger than I ever believed, and my story is not one of loss, but of survival. When I set down the pen, I felt a deep calm wash over me. For the first time, I wasn't looking backward with sorrow or forward with fear. I was simply living in the present, and the present was enough. As autumn deepened, I prepared the house for winter once again. But this time, there was no dread, no heaviness in my chest. Only steadiness. Only peace. And as the first frost touched the ground, I whispered into the cold air, I kept the promise, and I kept myself. Winter arrived once more. The mornings grew colder, the evenings darker, and the wind whispered against the windows. Yet inside my home, I felt warmth not just from the fireplace, but from the peace I had built within myself. It amazed me how different this winter felt from the last. A year ago, I had been living under the shadow of threats, consumed by grief, nearly convinced that I was powerless. Now, I understood that power doesn't come from control or possession. It comes from endurance, from faith, from the quiet courage to keep going when the world expects you to fall. One afternoon, I sat in the living room with a quilt across my lap, staring at the framed photograph of my son. His smile seemed to shine brighter in the firelight. I spoke softly, almost as if he could hear me. Son, I've kept your promise. You wanted me safe, and I am. You wanted this house to remain mine, and it has. But more than that, I've found myself again. I'm not just surviving, I'm living. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't heavy tears of grief. They were gentle tears of gratitude. Gratitude for love that outlives loss. Gratitude for strength I never knew I carried. As the snow began to fall outside, I brewed a pot of tea and sat at the kitchen table with my journal. This time, I didn't write about the pain of betrayal or the sting of words whispered at a funeral. I wrote about the lessons those hardships had taught me. People may try to take what you have. They may even try to take who you are. But they cannot succeed if you refuse to hand over your peace. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it is found in silence, in patience, in faith that the truth will endure. Those words felt like the very heartbeat of my story. That week, the grandchildren came to build snowmen in the yard. Their laughter rose above the quiet winter air, and I joined them, pressing snow into clumsy spheres with my gloved hands. My cheeks were cold, but my heart was warm. Later, as we sat inside sipping hot cocoa, the children asked me to tell a story about their father. I told them how he used to take them sledding when he was their age, how he would always race down the hill first, then run back up to cheer for his friends. Their eyes lit up, and in that moment, I realized that the greatest inheritance I could give them wasn't a house, or land, or even the garden. It was the story of their father's kindness, his laughter, his resilience. That story, passed from me to them, would last far longer than bricks or wood. In the evenings, I found myself sitting in the quiet, reflecting. I thought about betrayal, about loss, about the shadows I had faced, and then I thought about what had carried me through. It wasn't anger, it wasn't bitterness, it wasn't even the paperwork or the legal victories. What carried me was faith, patience, and love. Those things, I realized, were stronger than any scheme. Sometimes, I imagine speaking directly to other women like me, mothers, widows, grandmothers, who have known the sting of betrayal. If I could sit with them at a kitchen table, cup of tea in hand, I would tell them this. You are stronger than you know. The world may try to tell you that you are weak because of your age, your grief, or your silence. But none of that is true. Strength lives in you. It lives in the way you keep going, the way you love despite being hurt, the way you hold on to dignity when others throw it away. The snow outside grew heavier, blanketing the yard in white. I watched it from the window, feeling a calmness settle over me. Life would continue to bring challenges of that, I had no doubt. But I was no longer afraid. The storms had tested me, and I had discovered what I was made of. And so, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I whispered once more. I kept the promise. I kept the house. And most of all, I kept myself. That night, I slept peacefully, the kind of sleep that only comes when the heart is unburdened. The snow lingered for weeks, softening every edge of the yard and muffling the sounds of the world. It was as if life itself had slowed down, giving me the gift of reflection. Each morning, I wrapped myself in a shawl, stood by the window, and watched the frost sparkle on the trees. I thought about how far I had come. 1 year ago, I had been surrounded by whispers, weighed down by grief, and nearly convinced I was powerless. But here I was, now steady, peaceful, and whole. It wasn't just about surviving the storm. It was about finding meaning in the storm, about allowing it to shape me without breaking me. I returned often to my journal. The pages were filling quickly, not just with memories but with lessons. I wanted to leave something behind, not just a house, not just possessions, but words that carried truth. One afternoon, as I sat by the fire, I wrote, "The hardest battles are not fought in courtrooms or across kitchen tables. They are fought within the heart. The moment you choose dignity over anger, peace over bitterness, that is when you truly win." Oh. As my pen lifted from the page, I felt a calm certainty. These weren't just words for me. They were words for my grandchildren, for anyone who might one day wonder how their grandmother endured betrayal and loss. Life at the house had grown gentler. The children's visits filled the weekends with laughter. Neighbors continued to stop by with pies, soups, or simply warm conversation. The walls, once echoing with tension, now carried a softness again. I walked the rooms with gratitude. Each corner held memories of my son's laughter, of family dinners, of long nights when hope seemed faint. But those memories no longer pierced me with sorrow. They comforted me, reminding me that love leaves an imprint stronger than any wound. One day, I came across an old box tucked away in the closet. Inside were letters, photographs, and small tokens of my past life birthday cards, recipes scribbled on scraps of paper, a faded scarf my husband had once given me. I sat on the floor, sorting through them slowly. Some brought tears, others laughter. But what struck me most was how full my life had been. Yes, there had been pain. Yes, there had been betrayal. But there had also been deep joy, true love, and 1,000 small blessings that no one could ever take away. Holding that scarf in my hands, I realized something powerful. My life was not defined by the moments others tried to hurt me. My life was defined by how I chose to respond with love, with patience, with faith. That evening, I lit a candle and placed it by the window. I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for the trials themselves, but for the strength that had carried me through them. Lord, I prayed. Thank you for giving me more strength than I thought I had. Thank you for surrounding me with reminders of love, even in the darkest hours. And thank you for teaching me that peace is possible, even after betrayal. The flame flickered gently, as though agreeing with my words. In the following days, I noticed a shift inside me. It wasn't just peace, it was purpose. I had walked through shadows and come out into the light, and now I felt a responsibility to share that light, not through grand speeches or lectures, but through the way I lived, through kindness to neighbors, patience with the young, and honesty in my own heart. Because in the end, what we pass on isn't just property or possessions. It's the spirit with which we lived our lives. I often imagine sitting at a table with other women, mothers, widows, grandmothers who have carried burdens they never asked for. If I could, I would take their hands and tell them, "You are not alone. You are stronger than you know. Do not let anyone convince you that your age, your silence, or your grief makes you weak. The very fact that you are still here, still breathing, still hoping, that is strength." I would tell them that betrayal may cut deep, but it cannot erase dignity. That loss may weigh heavy, but it cannot destroy love. And that peace, though it may take time, is always worth waiting for. As winter's grip began to loosen, I found myself standing on the porch one morning, watching the snow slowly melt into rivulets along the path. The air carried the first hints of spring. I breathed deeply and whispered, "I am ready for what comes next." For the first time, those words weren't about survival. They were about living. The snow melted, the ground softened, and once again the garden began to stir with life. I walked outside one morning, the air cool but no longer biting, and saw the first green shoots pushing through the soil. Daffodils, bold and bright, reached toward the sky as though declaring that winter had passed and a new season was here. I smiled, because I knew the garden was not just soil and flowers. It was a mirror of my life. I had endured my own winter, dark, cold, heavy, but now, like those daffodils, I was standing again, reaching toward the light. In those quiet days of early spring, I often thought about the circle I had walked. It had begun at a funeral, with words whispered in cruelty, words meant to break me. It had continued through battles over paper, possessions, and power. And yet here I was not broken, not bitter, but stronger, calmer, more whole than before. I realized then that life is not about avoiding storms. It is about learning to stand in them, learning to keep faith when thunder rolls, learning to see that the sun will always return. And when it does return, it shines brighter for those who endured the darkness. The house, my son's gift, stood steady through it all. Its walls had heard whispers of betrayal. Its halls had echoed with grief. But they had also carried laughter, prayer, and healing. This house became more than shelter. It became a testimony that what was meant for harm can become a place of strength when you refuse to surrender. I often sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the garden come alive again, and whispered, "I kept your promise, son," and in keeping it, I found myself. Neighbors noticed the change in me. They said I seemed lighter, softer, even joyful. I told them the truth. Joy does not come from what others give or take. It comes from what you choose to hold on to, and I chose to hold on to peace. They would nod, perhaps not fully understanding, but I hoped my life showed them what words could not, that peace is possible, that dignity is worth protecting, that love, even after loss, remains the strongest force of all. The grandchildren continued to grow, their laughter still filling the house on weekends. Each time I saw them running through the yard, I felt a quiet pride, not because I had kept a house standing, but because I had kept their father's legacy alive. I taught them how to plant seeds, how to care for the garden, how to bake bread from scratch. But more than that, I tried to teach them patience, kindness, and resilience. One day, when they are grown, I hope they will remember not just the games and the cookies, but the deeper lesson that life can test you, but you are stronger than you think. And now, as I speak these words, I feel a deep calm settle over me. My story is not one of despair. It is a story of endurance. It is a story of betrayal turned into strength, of loss transformed into gratitude, of silence that spoke louder than cruelty ever could. If you are listening to me now, perhaps because you too have felt the sting of betrayal, let me leave you with this. You are not weak, you are not forgotten, and you are not alone. You carry a strength inside you that no one can steal. You carry a dignity that no cruel word can erase. And you carry a love that endures far beyond grief. The sun sets later now, casting long golden light across the porch. I sit quietly, hands folded in my lap, and breathe in the stillness. My heart, once heavy, now beats steady and free. I whisper to the evening air, I kept the promise. I kept the house. I kept the garden. But most of all, I kept myself. The wind rustles through the trees, carrying my words upward, and I feel at peace. So this is where my story closes, not with bitterness, but with blessing. I survived the storm, I found my strength, and I stand today with gratitude. And to you, listening, I say, may you also find peace in your trials, strength in your silence, and joy in the love that never fades. Because no matter what is taken from you, no matter what words are whispered against you, what truly matters cannot be stolen. Love endures, dignity endures, and you, yes, you endure.